Hey, dickheads, like a pink laser beam of truth beaming from across the internet to your brain holes. I am your personal dickhead, David Agronoff, here to do another PKD hangout. So we have a few people with us tonight, and I want to talk about the hangouts a little bit before we get into Gabe. And his book, which I'm very excited about. We have some really cool hangouts coming up in live real time, but the recordings are starting to trickle out from these live hangouts. They happen every Tuesday night at 6 o'clock Pacific time, 9 o'clock Eastern in the States. And you can join us anytime live when we have a guest. I'm trying my best to make the guests every week amazing. The next 2 weeks in real time, we're going to have Professor Lisa Yazik from Georgia Tech, who teaches science fiction studies at Georgia Tech. And then the week after, we're going to have Seth Davis, who is the child of Avram Davidson and Grania Davis, to come and talk about knowing Philip K. Dick in his childhood. His mother dated Phil. That's got to be interesting. And we're going to be doing that. Beyond that, I'm just starting to book the rest of May, and we've got some really exciting stuff coming up. So, but all these episodes will live forever on the YouTube feed. So if you just happened on this one because you came looking for Gabriel, we have tons of other interviews. So look for it. So like and subscribe to the Dickheads podcast as always. But please join us on Tuesdays, and then you can ask questions yourself, be a part of these things live. Gabe, Real, do you prefer Gabriel or Gabe? I know I
Uh,
asked you in Colorado, but
yeah, no, increasingly I prefer Gabriel, but I will answer to both. So yeah. I'm
okay.
not gonna hold it against you if you let a shorter version slip out.
Okay. Well, I got a preview of this book over breakfast because we stayed in the same hotel during PKD Fest. And I'm very excited that it is finally here. And we will get into this particular book in a little bit, but why don't you give people an introduction of how you ended up studying religions and UFOs and all this stuff? What's your background? How did you get to this spot?
Yeah, sure. So I have a background in the study of religion, but I got into religion, no joke, because of Philip K. Dick. When I was probably 18 years old, I decided I wanted to start reading science fiction, and one of the first books I read was Valis, which was kind of my awakening to both science fiction as a genre after maybe one or two other books, but also to religion as a thing that is interesting and weird, and not the kind of boring dogmatic thing that I had kind of been led to believe that all religion was. And so it kind of set me on a kind of academic journey of a few years, where I was studying early Christianity, kind of the Protestant Reformation, but also world religions, mostly from like a kind of the angle of mysticism. And Philip K. Dick was kind of the motivating factor for a lot of that. So in 2004, when I was still in grad school, or when I just graduated from my theology master's, I published a book on Philip K. Dick. So, Pink Beams of Light from the God in the Gutter: The Science Fictional Religion of Philip K. Dick. There's a theme of long book titles
Yeah.
that you will notice going on. Love a long book title, and so that was basically kind of my analysis of religious ideas in Phil's writing. Um, mostly focusing on what was available to that point of the exegesis, which was not much. There was the 200 and something page Lawrence Sutton edition of In Pursuit of Valis, and bits and pieces here and there, and then Valis and Radio Free Albemuth, and what came after that had been
Mm-hmm.
published. And so that was basically what I had to work with. So it's a pretty slim book, but I
Did you
continued
touch
working.
on older books like Three Stigmata and Maze of Death and
I
things?
do get a little bit into those, and so but the kind of meat of it is about the exegesis. So I do periodically think, I really should go back and do, I was very young when that book was published. I should go back and do a more kind of like knowing what I know now kind of thing. Not only
Well,
in
because there's a
terms
lot
of
more information
exactly, yeah,
available.
yeah. There's so
Yeah.
much more available now, and in fact, as we will probably get to, essentially the entire exegesis, not just the published selections, is now available to us.
We'll get to
We'll
that, but
get to
we're
that. We'll
going to
get to
talk
that.
about
Uh,
your book first.
but then, yeah, so I have done a lot of, but since then I've kind of been a scholar of opportunity rather than getting a PhD. I went into library school. One of the reasons I did that is because librarians are kind of encouraged to be generalists and know a little about a lot of things. And I really, I wanted to study a lot of stuff and kind of be a scholar of opportunity and just kind of chase whatever interested me, as deep down the rabbit hole as seemed appropriate.
So let's
And
rewind just a little bit. Where did
yeah.
you grow up, and how did you first find that Philip K. Dick book when you were 18?
Oh yeah, so I grew up in northeastern Connecticut, what we call Swamp Yankee territory. But not far from the University of Connecticut. And it was lent to me by a friend. So a friend of mine who lived in a couple towns over had been reading stuff by Phil. Probably only started reading him a couple months before I did, but she lent it to me. And yeah, but before that, I had decided, I wanted to read science fiction. I've been reading a lot of literary fiction and not necessarily getting a lot out of it. In the year or two leading up to that. But I had fond memories of a book that I used to get from the library when I was a kid that had illustrations from Arthur C. Clarke's Rendezvous with Rama. And that was the one that I started with, which very different author than Phil, but
Yeah.
Childhood's End, which I didn't get to until a little later, was certainly very influential on him, I think.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, and so
No,
I
I'm
did,
not anti Clark here.
yeah.
I like Songs of a Distant Earth quite a bit.
Oh,
So
okay.
yeah,
Good
and
choice.
Childhood's End, of course. I think
Yeah.
is very important. So where did you study, and where did you where did you not everyone gets acceptance for wanting to take this path of study when they go to their teachers or advisors above. They're not lucky to have Lisa Yazek or Professor David Harlan Wilson as their teachers, right?
Yeah,
So not
yeah. So
yeah,
as an undergraduate, I was at Hampshire College in Western Massachusetts, which is basically experimental education kind of school. It has no tests, no grades, and you design your own major. And so they really encourage interdisciplinary work. And so I was working with the people, you didn't really have a religion department, but there were a couple professors who taught things on religion. Um, and so that was my concentration. But one of them, taught Augustine and Camus and existential philosophy and things like that, and the other taught mystical literature. So he was kind of the easier sell because he could see, how this fit in. But the one that taught Augustine, I had to convince. He was like, I don't really know anything about science fiction. Why do you think that I would help with this? But I was like, no, no, you just like let me get a chapter to you. You'll understand. It's really about like philosophy and theology. And so once he actually saw, he didn't know about
right.
Philip K. Dick, but he did definitely know the philosophy and theology side. So once he saw that
So
that's what I was wrestling with, he was on board.
so where did the philosophy and theology come from there? Because there had to be a reason why that immediately hooked you with PKD. Not everyone's going to read Valis and be like, "Oh, this is the shit" at 18 years old. Like, how did that happen for you? You think?
I think it was kind of just ineffable in a way. Just there was something about the way that he used language and humor, especially and
Mm,
also incorporated doubt into his descriptions of his experience. I mean, the very fact that he splits himself into two people, one of whom thinks this is all bullshit, is kind of a brilliant literary move, but also is a great way to kind of make this dialectical kind of approach to every idea really come to life. Where, if you don't like the idea that horse lover fat is spinning right now, that's okay because you've got Philip K. Dick here to tell you that it, is crazy and you don't need to listen to it.
Right.
And so, but just the kind of the speed with which the ideas come at you in that book, I think is kind of it's a powerful drug.
Now, Gabriel is long overdue being on this podcast. I have been wanting to bring him on for a long time. Um, this man can get as nerdy as it gets with the religious stuff with Philip K. Dick. So if you're into that stuff, make sure you keep listening after we talk about the new book because we will go into that a little bit later. And but we want to talk about the new book, which is not as closely Phil related as the stuff that we'll eventually get to. And Gabriel has an exciting new project that he's been working on that is very much Philip K. Dick related, and you can be involved. So you want to stick around and listen for that. But for now, how did you first hear about Gary Barker?
So
um,
Gray Barker, yeah. Um, I was working on a project with the UFO book collection of Jack Womack, who's a science fiction author, actually won the Philip K. Dick Award in, I think, 1993 or so for his book Elvisy. Great author and a guy who has a legendary collection of weird books. And
Now,
so,
I,
yeah.
I went one step too far. If I should have asked you first, where is it that you work and archive and as a I don't know, as a librarian, you're an archivist, right?
So I right now no, but I did work as an archivist for a few years
Okay.
and that's actually where I was when I was working on the Jack Womack project. So I was at
Yeah.
a kind of archives processing company slash now they're a bit more of like a rare book dealer called Boo Hooray, that specializes in like post-war counterculture. Um, and so that was kind of the angle that I was coming towards this stuff from. Um, and as I was going through Jack's book collection, I was realizing that the books with the craziest titles that were the weirdest formats, just in terms of like size and page count and everything, and had kind of the most striking aesthetic, all had the same Clarksburg, West Virginia imprint on them. And I was kind of scratching my head at that, like like who publishes books in Clarksburg, West Virginia? And then one of the books that had, I think, probably for my money, the best title, if not of a UFO book, possibly of any book ever written, They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers, was written by this guy, Gray Barker. And as I was going through the materials, I realized that the guy behind this Clarksburg, West Virginia imprint, Saucerian Books, was the guy who had written that book, with the amazing title. And so the project started out that I was just interested in these books as kind of physical objects, as well as them being kind of the strangest and most out there in terms of content. Somebody whose favorite science fiction authors, Philip K. Dick, is obviously going to be into the weirdest of the UFO books. So,
Right. And the
so
most direct connection is that is obviously for anyone who's read Confessions of a Crap Artist, is there was a UFO group that was around Point Reyes, you
yeah,
know. And if Gil were here tonight, he would be and he's off and we're all jealous of him seeing Nettie Okorafor speak in Oakland tonight. Um, but he would know more about this UFO group, but I'm assuming that
if
connection
he
was something that sparked your interest, right?
if he's been able to turn anything up specific about that Point Reyes group, I would love to hear it because I have wondered about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I hope he can learn more and tell me it all about it. So,
Yeah. But that's that UFO group was probably they were all buying these Barker books, I'm
oh
sure.
yeah,
Like,
yeah, definitely. That's exactly who his kind of customer base was, 'cause he was publishing contact ebooks, so books by people who said not only, I saw a weird light in the sky, but I saw a flying saucer land in the desert and a guy in a silver spacesuit got out and told me that we need to stop making nuclear weapons. So that kind of narrative. And then also like channeled messages, so kind of psychic messages received from the space people. And that was kind of Barker's bread and butter for his publishing imprint, was that kind of stuff. And that's exactly, what that group in Crap Artist is doing and interested in. So yeah, he definitely would have been selling
Now,
books to them.
and the thing about this, do you and I'm having to like ask a few questions I already know the answer to because I grilled you about this book
Yeah.
pretty intensely in Colorado. Um, but um, do you think Barker believed all this stuff, or was it about money? Did he believe some of it? Would he publish stuff that maybe he believed, like, oh, I believe this guy, but I don't believe this person, but I'm still going to publish their story anyways? What was his belief level on this, do you
Yeah,
think?
sure. So this is a really interesting question. It's really hard to pin down. And I think the first thing I have to do anytime somebody asks me this question is like push back a little on the framing, because the kind of conventional wisdom about Barker is he was just in it for the money. That
Yeah.
he was just gonna like sell you whatever crap, and he just was gonna pocket the money and didn't believe any of it. He was just cynical and only cared about, tricking people, and making money off of it. But in fact, what I found in researching his life and his finances is that he went bankrupt doing this, and that
Yeah.
he probably lost more money on saucers than he made. And it was really a kind of labor of love and a hobby for him. But that doesn't necessarily mean that he was therefore believing all these things on face value, which I certainly don't think he was. But I think
Yeah.
that that kind of binary of you believe or you don't is something that is a framing that I don't think applies to him, because for
Sure.
him, it was all kind of narrative. It was all stories, and they were interesting on the level of stories. And he wanted to, whoever he's talking to or writing to, or publishing for, he wants to tell them a story that's going to entertain them. And that's the level at which he kind of cares. Um, and so I think it goes a little bit beyond belief or disbelief for him. It was much more a kind of love of the process of building and communicating a narrative. And really has nothing to do with any kind of objective truth, if that is a phrase that we're going to assume has a real meaning. Which in
Well,
this room, maybe we shouldn't.
and I don't know. I mean, there are certainly people within the UFO community who I am less skeptic or more skeptical of.
Oh, for sure.
And uh, one I have made obvious many times, but I, 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 you know, is it Gray Barker? It's
Gray, yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah. Now he's a fascinating character, and so he's one of the things that makes. I didn't read your book as closely as I wanted to because I'm a bad e-reader and I had an electronic copy, and I will eventually get the hard copy, and then my highlighter will come out and I'll get really interested in it. But I'll get really deep on it. But what's really amazing about Barker is that I think you're right. It was more of a hobby for him. It was more of like it was a passion for sure. And he started off with like zines before
Yeah.
he did books, right? So there were saucer zines first. Can you talk about that evolution from how his publishing started? Because even just like how he was publishing them is a fascinating story in its own right. And you said you started because you were interested in these books as a physical thing.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So he started his zine, The Saucerian, in 1953. So it was one of the first flying saucer zines. The first one started in 52, so he was in that first wave. Um, and that this is actually kind of something that I'm actively researching right now. Beyond Gray Barker is this kind of very early period of saucer zine publishing. And they publishers of these were using cheap print technology. So he used a Ditto printer, so like similar to mimeograph. But this is office copying technology. But it's the same kind of thing that science fiction fanzines were being printed on. Um, and what I'm looking for a lot is links between the early saucerzine world and the science fiction fanzine world. And there
Mhm.
are more overlap than either of them would want to admit, is what I'm finding.
Right,
Um,
because the saucer people want to be taken seriously as not science fiction, and then the science fiction people think the saucer
exactly.
people are a little kooky or whatever.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, I could see where those two worlds wouldn't combine. And one of the things that's really interesting about how you structured your book is that you get really into like how the different eras from the 60s, 70s, and 80s, these decades, have a very different mentality for how they look at the contactee or the saucer phenomenon. You know, specifically, I think it's funny of like how new wavy the 80s got, right?
Yeah.
And we'll get to that, but let's talk about each of those different eras. Like, what was the 50s like as a saucerian, right? As a saucer person, like what made the 50s unique? Because this was like really when it's first starting to become a culture that communicates with each other.
Yeah, so I'm going to push back a little further than that to the 40s because I think to understand the
Yeah,
50s, so the first flying saucer sightings are in 1947.
yeah.
So there's a guy named Kenneth Arnold who's a private pilot who sees, some objects that he can't identify while he's flying in Washington State. And the newspapers call them flying saucers based on a basically a misquotation of something that he said about them. Um, and from it was presented kind of over the news wire, so it dispersed throughout the country very quickly. And those newspapers were presenting this as a mystery, but of course, a mystery is something that you are going to expect to be solved, at least in this framing. The word gets a little trickier later on, but we'll get to that. So in the late 40s, right around to about 50, 51, the general public basically believes, the government is looking into this. They're going to answer what this is. And the two most likely things that people believed were either it was American, experimental technology or Soviet experimental technology. That was basically, the kind of idea of extraterrestrial spacecraft had not come into the equation.
Mm-hmm.
But people expected that the government was going to find the answer and tell the public that, we would know within a few months. So around 50, 51, people start to get impatient waiting for that answer. And so you start seeing these civilian saucer groups pop up that are, civilian saucer investigation was the name of one of them. That it's like, we're regular people, we're going to collect all the data, which is newspaper clippings, and we're going to, find the answer ourselves because we don't trust that the Air Force is going to get that to us. And around that same time, you also start seeing the first kind of big theorization that this is not some kind of experimental spacecraft, that it is, an extraterrestrial phenomenon. And the big grain of salt that I want to put with everything that I'm saying here is this is all assuming a single phenomenon, which is something that is kind of the core assumption of the entire world of UFO research is that UFOs are a single thing that we can, investigate and explain, which I think is probably not the case. I think people see a lot of different things that they can't identify, and they all get grouped together. And so my kind of big most important sentence in my introduction is flying saucers are a literary phenomenon. Insofar as they exist as a single thing that we can talk about, it's a cultural thing. It's a thing that comes to us in books and magazines, and that is something that most people read about. And even if they've seen something, they're interpreting what they see through other narratives that they've heard, either orally or by reading.
Well, and I remember as a young person, one of the things that made me a little bit more interested in what Whitley Strieber was saying when I read Communion was is that at the time he wouldn't say it's aliens. He said, I don't know what they are.
Yeah, yeah. And
Yeah.
and that's
And
the thing that's so fascinating about him being kind of so associated with the alien abduction narrative is that he never says I was abducted by aliens. He is
Right.
always looking for a weirder explanation.
Yeah.
And
Right.
I don't know. That's one of the reasons I think he's such an interesting writer. But yeah, we don't want to get too far down the Whitley Strieber rabbit hole.
Oh, and I want to welcome Keith Giles to the discussion. Keith, you're gonna love when we get back into Gabriel's work on the exegesis and stuff like that. Um, so the uh, um, the funny thing about um, the 60s is that then you have like a lot of people who start to distrust the government. So that changes the way the saucer movement goes in the 60s, right? So the 60s is a totally different phenomenon, right?
Yeah, yeah. And so a few things have happened by the 60s, and one of them is something that Gray Barker is really a primary mover in, and that is this kind of growth of conspiratorial thinking. And that's something that was there before Barker. So Donald Kehoe is really the first kind of bestseller flying saucer author. And he kind of starts beating the drum of like, don't trust the government because he does not believe that the Air Force is being forthcoming with what it knows. um, Barker kind of building on this and some strange experiences that one of his friends in civilian saucer research has, kind of constructs this narrative of the Men in Black. So these kind of dark suited figures who go to UFO witnesses or UFO researchers and tell them, stop talking about what you saw, stop writing about UFOs and publishing and researching them. Um, and that this then becomes a kind of another mystery that the world of flying saucers can explore is who
And
are the three
eventually a
men?
blockbuster Hollywood movie.
Yes. So, but what's interesting is, so Donald Kehoe is very specific about who he thinks there is a conspiracy, and he's very specific. It is like a small number of people in the U.S. Air Force. Gray Barker is just like, something weird is happening. There are people out there who don't want you personally to research UFOs, and he does not posit any kind of you know stable theory about who or what that might be, and he even introduces in a lot of ambiguity that they may in fact not even be earthly beings themselves. And so he's building this into a mystery. It's kind of a conspiracy theory without conspirators. Just that there is some kind of cosmic force that is involved in UFO research and trying to mess with the people who are in that world. Um, but it that does kind of lead to this kind of a lot of suspicion, and I think it ramps up the conspiratorial thinking that was happening in the saucer world. And also just the fact that because there have either been fairly conventional explanations of a lot of people's sightings, that it was something classified in the 50s that maybe got declassified later, or just essentially this idea that the stories that you had heard about in the 40s and 50s weren't being taken seriously. But what you see is because this kind of tolerance to normal sighting reports gets built up in the flying saucer world, where it's like, oh, you saw like a light moving in a weird way at 11 p.m. Like that's kind of boring. Tell me about something that had like a weird noxious gas, or a hairy being 3 feet tall that you saw running around. There's a thirst for novelty, and a desire for things to be weirder. Because after all, if these are aliens, they're going to be weird, right? So then they kind of latch on to the stories that are stranger, whereas in the earlier 50s, there was kind of a downplaying of things that were too weird because that's just silly, right? That is a reason not to take it seriously. So it had been a reason to disregard a story becomes a reason to accept it and discuss it.
So the 70s, a weird time in general, but in the saucer how old is Barker at this point? Like, because he still
Oh, you're
was
gonna make me
doing
do
this stuff
math.
through.
He is so he was born in 25, so he's in his 40s, in the early 70s.
Okay, so he was still doing this stuff during the 70s and 80s still,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, he
Yeah.
did scale back his he kind of had ebbs and flows in his publishing work because like I said he wasn't making a lot of money on it. And so he had to spend more time on his regular work, which was mostly motion picture promotion. He was involved in booking movies and promoting movies for drive-in theaters, which is a whole element of kind of showmanship that becomes a very big part of who he was and what he did. And
Now
so,
that is also fascinating about
yeah,
him too. But so he is just a really well. We'll get back to my overall thing on that, but the in the 80s when things got really new wave, I'm wondering, was there any of this that just he was like, okay, this is not what I'm into, but this is where the scene is going, so I'm gonna spread the word because you know, I didn't get I just didn't get the feeling that he was as into the new wave stuff, but I could be wrong,
yeah.
right?
So, I mean, so the in the 60s and 70s, these stories, had really taken a hard turn into that weirdness, and that had a lot to do with John Keel, who started getting interested in UFOs in 1966. He's probably best known for his book, The Mothman Prophecies, that came out in 76. He and Barker were friends and rivals, kind of in equal measure. And they definitely fed on each other in several senses of the word. They pranked each other, they egged each other on. They were covering a lot of the same stories, and so they were both became major figures in this kind of movement called middle ufology. That grew up in the 60s and 70s, and the middle that was supposed to be was between the kind of very serious, we are going to find the nature of these physical craft that people have been seeing, and the contactees who were saying we have the answer. It's the Space Brothers, and they are here to help us. So the middle actually ends up being anything that's weirder than either of those options. So middle suggests that it's kind of down to earth and it's going to be rational and balance both sides. They're actually going off on a completely different angle, and that's where you see theories about other dimensions and fairies and things like that. So John Keel, Jacques Vallée are big people in that world, and Gray Barker becomes pretty important in it too. But you asked if there was anything that was kind of beyond the pale for him, and it's interesting because in the late '60s through the mid '70s is when you first start getting stories of alien abduction. So not contact with friendly space people, but kind of people being seized and taken away, for a short period of time by bizarre beings. And when the first couple of these stories come out, not just Barker, but a lot of people in the UFO world looked at them as contact stories, as just a different take on the I met friendly space people story.
Yeah,
And so you see Barker having what I would say is the closest to a traditional skeptical response to any kind of story that I ever have seen him take was to one of the early abduction stories, the Travis Walton case in Arizona, which became the movie Fire in the Sky. Um, he was very skeptical of that story, but he was skeptical of it because it was too much like a contact story.
yeah.
And I think there was a sense that he kind of didn't like the way it was pushing at the boundaries of the genre that he'd been working in for over a decade at this point.
Reminds me of that. Have you seen the SNL skit with Kate McKinnon
Oh,
and Ryan
yes.
Gosling? Yeah. For those who haven't seen it, it's Ryan Gosling's character is like telling this beautiful story about how wonderful his contact experience was, and Kate McKinnon's character is like, you know, they violated me in every way possible, and it's like just showing like it's very it's very funny if you see it. Like it's very good skit. I appreciate that. So I sold your book to somebody today who was very like I had this discussion with somebody who is a very skeptical person who when I first told them that I was doing this interview, they were like, like, oh, flying saucer stuff, blah blah blah. There's no way aliens are coming here. We live so far. And I said, hey, that's you don't need to read the book to believe it. and I kept saying that this book is very much about these characters and this scene and this literary movement and this, like, this history of this, like, happening, this thing, and these fascinating characters, especially Gray Barker, is just being like a fascinating dude. um I, I mean, I don't know, how do you, because I've never asked you, Gabriel, if you actually like believe any of this. I kind of assumed you didn't, but you know, how
Well,
do
I
you
mean,
feel about selling the book to people who don't believe at all?
yeah, yeah. So, I mean, my answer to the what do you believe question is going to be frustratingly similar to the question about Gray Barker and what he really believed. But I come from religious studies background, right? Like whether I personally believe in like any specific, miracle attributed to any particular saint has nothing to do with the study of the way that that saint is venerated in 17th century Italy, right?
Right.
That happened. Like that veneration is a historical fact, and it's kind of exactly the same thing with flying saucers. I don't particularly
or
care one way or the other about
or a pink beam experience
any
with
kind of
Philip K. Dick.
objective reality to a sighting, but I'm fascinated in the people that communicate these stories, the way they communicate them, and to me, the kind of mystery worth exploring is a mystery in the human mind and in human culture, and
Yeah.
in publications that people put out. That to me is way more interesting. So, I certainly, but I also draw a distinction between people who experience things, um, which, just as with, somebody who claims a mystical experience, I'm not going to like cast doubt on that because that's an experience that they had, and I am not inside their brain. But I'm not under any obligation to accept their interpretation of it or an interpretation that anyone else puts on it. And what you see in the flying saucer world is so Gray Barker, I don't think had much of an agenda. I think he wanted to tell a lot of stories that were going to entertain people. What you see, especially in the 80s and 90s, is people doing the same kind of manipulations that he was doing, but they have a real agenda, and in some cases, a sinister agenda
Oh yeah.
behind the way what they were doing when they were manipulating stories. So a lot of that kind of darker conspiracism came after Gray Barker, and I think he did kind of set the stage for a lot of it in a kind of unfortunate way, in a way he maybe didn't foresee where it might go. Um,
Yeah, the sheer amount of products that some of these
yes,
people sell, and
it is a world that attracts grifters for sure. And I mean, Barker was doing the same thing. He sold seeds that he claimed with a big question mark were from outer space. He sold a cosmic light column. I'm not even sure what that was. Uh, but one other thing to keep in mind is that so Gray Barker did a lot of hoaxes. He
yeah,
took hoax photographs. He would like send forged documents to people, and so a lot of those stories are in there. And in a way, I think studying Gray Barker's life and what he did is kind of an antidote to simple belief in any
yeah,
kind of narrative because you can literally see the strings. Uh,
yeah,
and you can see, if he is doing this and he's kind of showing you in a lot of ways, this is how I'm playing with the truth. If you're paying really close attention to how he's writing things, he actually pulls back the curtain a little to show you the manipulation he's doing.
yeah,
A lot of these other writers are doing that same manipulation, but not showing you how it's done. But if you can see it, done through him, you can kind of get a bit of a keener eye for close reading of other people's kind of conspiratorial writing and see how they're doing the same things and hopefully not get pulled in by them.
right. So specifically, was it the character that made you, or just like how neat the books were, or just the this or seeing that this was a history that hadn't been told? What was the motivation between this, by sitting down and like, I'm going to write a book about this, I'm going to pitch it, and again, congratulations on
Thank you.
MIT Press, is
Yes.
not a little deal.
So all of that. So the books that he published were the thing that I was interested in first, and this this book's original form was actually a bibliography, not a biography. It was just about the books. Um, it took many, mutated several times. I think I've written this book 4 times before my final draft. Um, and one of the things that was most interesting to me was so he was somebody who would publish things from the slush pile. He would get like what he would call a crackpot letter. His archive has 6 or 7 folders labeled crackpot number one, crackpot number two. And so when someone would send him a crazy letter, he wouldn't throw it in the trash. He would write back to them and say, "Oh, tell me more about, the voices that you heard from planet Arcturus. Do you maybe have a manuscript you'd be willing to send me?" And so some of his books actually got published this way. But what's interesting to me about that is not just the content of those things, and I'm interested in the writing of eccentrics in general. Um, and
You
there
don't say.
Yes, yes. So there was an exhibition at the Museum of Jurassic Technology a few years ago in California that was of essentially crackpot letters sent to an observatory. So it was people's theories about the stars and the real nature of the universe, and they're going to tell the scientists who are actually studying stars and planets, this is what it really is out there. And the title of that exhibit kind of sums this up for me. It was called "No One May Ever Have the Same Knowledge Again." This idea that people who have developed these kind of idiosyncratic ideas, if they don't share them in some way, then they die with them. And this is something that Richard Shaver is somebody that I'm also really interested in, the science fiction writer from the 40s, who similarly, his first letter to Amazing Stories said, "I'm sending you this to keep it from dying with me." Um, but a lot of the writers that Saucerian published are people who come from walks of life that would not normally be writing or publishing anything. So like Truman Bethurum is one of the big flying saucer contactees. He was working as a road construction worker in California when he had his contact experiences. The book of his that Saucerian published, the first 50 pages are about growing up poor in the 1890s in the last days of the Old West. It is a fascinating memoir before he ever gets to the aliens, and so that was kind of one of the things that hooked me on that. And then as I was looking into Gray Barker personally, I was learning that he was also just a fascinating character. He was gay and not entirely closeted in West Virginia in the 50s and 60s, which was kind of its own kind of really interesting angle on his life story. I really enjoyed learning about the history of drive-in movie theaters in
Oh yeah, I
his
bet
life.
that's great.
And also he's just a really talented writer. He has a really good way of hooking the reader with prose. And he wrote poetry as well, which is also great. And I'm hoping to kind of do a little more with, because most of it is unpublished.
Well, so my experience in so just for everyone who's listening to this, we first talked about this book at the Philip K. Dick Festival in Colorado over breakfast. I knew you did. I had seen your presentation. I knew you were really into Valis and all that stuff, and I was not prepared to have a discussion about UFOs over oatmeal, in the morning. But once you started talking about this guy, he was so fascinating. I couldn't wait for this book to come out, and I'm super stoked for you, Gabriel, that it's here. I think it's gonna it might percolate for a bit, but I guarantee you, when people figure out about this character, you're gonna have a lot of people finding this book and getting really neat story on it. But
I hope so.
this is a Philip K. Dick podcast,
It's true.
so we're gonna get back to the PKD stuff a little bit. But I told everyone that the floor has been open from the beginning. But if people want to raise their hands, if they have Saucerian questions, you can interject at any time. But I do want to fill everybody in on, pun intended, on some of the things that you're doing in relation to the exegesis, because it's very important work. Some of us in the Hangout already know, because you came to our Hangout before we started recording them every week. and gave us a preview on the work that you're doing. But I there are some people here that weren't here the first time. So um, tell everybody like what you're working on with the exegesis. I mean, you're doing tons of different stuff with the exegesis, so you could go many different
Yeah.
places, but you're making more pages of the exegesis available to people than were previously available. Tell the folks how.
Yes. So for the last year or so, I have been the managing editor of something called the Zebrapedia project. That's managing editor is essentially a self-imposed title, but I like it, and I think it describes well what I'm doing. That is a project that has existed since the publication of the selection of stuff from the exegesis that was edited by Jonathan Lethem and Pamela Jackson, which came out in 2011, I think. I was one of the annotators on that, on the basis of the Pink Beams book that I had done back in 2004. And this is a project that was kind of spearheaded by Rich Doyle at Penn State University, who was also working on the book project, but wanted to kind of keep a conversation going about the exegesis among a lot of the kind of interested people. And he was able to secure permission to basically make a web portal where the original page images could be available, and the entire thing could be transcribed, and this kind of ongoing annotation process could happen.
And
So
this is how you've become an expert on Phil's handwriting, for
yes,
example.
yes, I can read it very well now. Um, it's yeah,
And by the way, his handwriting is not easy to read as somebody
not
who's
it's
read a
not the
lot of
best
it.
handwriting, not the best handwriting.
Yeah.
But so that project came into existence, I think, before the book was even published, and it had for most of its life about two-thirds of the page images. So I have theories about why there was what happened with the other third, but that other 2,000 pages or so existed. It just had never been uploaded, and the agreement to make this available included the whole thing. So I was able to track down the scans of the remaining material, and with the people that were working on the book project, and so now the essentially the entire exegesis, about 8,500 pages, I think, are available in Zebrapedia. There is some material that's not there,
So
but I
what
don't know.
percentage versus what was published versus what you're now making available for anyone
Yeah,
here can get a membership and sign up and be able to look at this stuff.
yeah, and help transcribe, because there is still at least a
There's
thousand
tons
pages
of
left to
you haven't even
transcribe. So there's
transcribed
work
yet.
to do. So I would say what had been published was probably about 33%. What had been available through Zebrapedia was probably about 70%, and what's available now is probably about 95 to 99%. But not all transcribed. And so we did
So
do
there's still, because think about this, any one of these pages could have like a hidden gem of something that these nerds, like whoever was looking at it in the past might not have, Jonathan Lethem, God bless you, you're a glorious PKD nerd. But maybe Gabriel's going to find something, or Gil's going to find something, or I'm going to find something, and be like, "Whoa, that has relation to what I was researching." So there's still gems we could find, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I was talking to Jonathan about this at the fest, in fact, because in the introduction they say, well, the stuff that we didn't include is kind of him spinning his wheels and him going down some weird rabbit holes. And one of those weird rabbit holes was something that I was particularly interested in, which was the Xerox missive.
Mm-hmm.
Because my presentation at the Dick Fest, which is became a chapter of a book on Philip K. Dick that is supposed to come out later this year, I think, um, on theology, the esoteric theology of Philip K. Dick, was on ideas of kind of human beings being programmed and controlled, and his experience being a sign that that control can be broken. That was basically the meat of my Dickfest presentation. And
Whereas the team that was doing the exegesis publishing earlier might have thought that was just spinning wheels, but you're like, that is exactly
yeah,
something
I
that I'm
found some
interested in.
gems because I found, references to him. He tells this story about calling the police department and telling them that he's an android, and he's dangerous and he needs to be locked up. And one of the tellings of that story was in the exegesis and had not been published, and it was a useful one to me. Um, but
Right.
uh but but a lot of these things are, it's a piece here that is meaningful if you can connect it to a piece over there. And so what speaks to one person is not necessarily gonna speak to everyone, but the ability to make those kind of connections across, the 8,500 pages is really, um you know it's the best thing to do, I think, with this stuff. So
Right. And look, we this particular eccentric writer is the one that we're all really curious in. So, the fact that there are all these words that he wrote that were thought lost that are still, that means there's new things to find. And who knows what random day in 1977 that he had his pencil out, that he might have jotted down an idea that is specific to you know, the legions of us who study him. It
yeah,
could be there.
yeah,
And we don't know. And for example, for me, for you, that the Xerox missive is very interesting. For me, if he's talking about the formation of ideas,
yeah,
about how he's putting together Ubik. So like for most people, the 17-page outline for anti-talent is not as interesting because I just would rather read Ubik. But for me, as a person who's studying how he constructs these books, that outline is fucking gold, right?
yeah. Yeah, and there are notes in there for Owl and Daylight, that was never published. I'm not positive. I don't know if all of that was published because I know Sutton in particular was really interested in capturing all of the kind of story ideas in
Mm-hmm.
the edition that he published. But I think there are probably places where, it's a 30-page section that he's kind of spinning ideas out, and the most interesting stuff is on pages 1 through 5.
Yeah,
But there's more on pages 6 through 30 that would be of interest to you for sure. So
yeah, yeah. Oh, absolutely. And it's just fascinating that there's still more to go.
yeah,
And you know it's well, and the Xerox missive stuff too, like and like the die words and and all those things that are part of that whole era where a lot of people, again, this is that people will shirk this off. And I wonder if you like, I was just looking at I'm rereading the Sci-Fi Masterworks edition of Time on a Joint, and I was really annoyed by the afterword on it, and I'm not sure who it's written by. Um, the very first sentence of the afterword is the psychosis took over in earnest for Philip K. Dick sometime in March of 1974. And I found that to be very dismissive. Like, and I know like Kyle Arnold did a whole book on the divine madness and all that. And I'm a skeptical person in general, but to just declare in the first sentence of an afterword of this guy's book that psychosis took over. Is that your diagnosis, doctor? Who are you to say this in an afterword for his book? And I found that very annoying. Um, but as somebody who's like reading all these things, like, do you feel like for me that the the kind of post diagnosis from people who weren't actually Phil's doctor, does that annoy you as much as it does
oh yeah,
me?
yes, it
Yes,
does. And
I'm turning
I
on a
mean,
light
there are a
bulb.
number of reasons for that. I really like Kyle Arnold's book, and it's because he is looking at Phil's project in the exegesis, kind of the way that I look at it, which is not as a sign that he's gone completely off the deep end, but
Right.
as a sign that he's working to heal himself. To me, if you want to look for a period where the psychosis had taken him
That's this
over,
book.
yes, if you want to look for a period where the psychosis had taken him over, it's 2, 3 years before, when Nancy has left him and his house is full of kids doing drugs. It's the Scanner Darkly years,
Yes.
which we don't know a ton about because there's not much written record left, right? There's his own accounts of it and letters here and there, but we don't have
Actually,
we
his
have
step
for
or uh his mother's husband, I don't want to call him stepfather because he was an adult when she married him, but
yeah.
like his journal about that time is where you get the most information.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So whereas with 1974, you have a lot of written evidence that he has left behind. And to somebody who's not willing to look at it sympathetically, it could look like this is just crazy, and this is clearly someone who is like deeply damaged and is not coming back. When in fact that writing process is a way for him to get himself back.
I,
I'm
I
not
would
gonna.
argue that he was in a better mental state when he was writing the exegesis than he was post Nancy divorce and
Yeah,
living in
yeah, yeah.
Oakland. What? Yeah, I
And
mean
obviously,
that's
he did still have suicide attempts after 1974. He wasn't all better, but certainly by the kind of later exegesis, a lot. I'm trying to do like a real chronology of the material. That's one of the projects that I'm kind of undertaking, and I'm finding that a lot of what we have is from like 1980, 81. So like there's actually not that much from like 74, 75, 76. It's mostly later. Um, and there's a lot of joy in those pages, and I'm not saying his life was perfect or that he was entirely psychologically great guy who, obviously, you know he had not stayed married at that point to anyone,
yeah,
but I think for him this entire thing was a process of healing, from a variety of kind of psychic wounds, that go back, beyond 1972, and, even beyond 1950. So,
yeah. No, and I think it's just it's wonderful that we have these things. And I mean, he's obviously there were moments or there were days where he was happy, he was doing things that he enjoyed, and it's funny because I just you can take random examples like his friendship with Doris was during that time was something that I think was healthier than most of his marriages. It definitely was, and partially because she wouldn't marry him,
yeah.
and and but I have a lot of fun thinking about them getting Chinese takeout or her getting Chinese takeout and them sitting with TV trays, in the 70s, like eating Chinese food. And he seemed to be really enjoying that friendship. And that's why I think it hurt when she couldn't afford to keep living there. And then, we
Yeah.
had the
Yeah.
opening chapters of Divine Invasion. But, um, you know, there was times that their friendship was really lovely. So,
Yeah. And
and I'm
also,
sure he
like,
was
I mean,
writing about that.
if that represents psychosis taking over, and that is where Transmigration of Timothy Archer came from, then I think we should all hope for a little more psychosis in our
Yeah.
lives, because that is a true masterpiece,
Yeah,
and
that's it.
not something that
I didn't even read the rest of the afterword. I was looking I was looking to just see what the last page of the book was, like how many pages this edition was. And when I saw that sentence, I was just like very taken aback and shame on who wrote this afterward. Um, I will tell you in a second. Lou Stathis, Stathis. I don't even know who that is. It says Toronto,
yeah,
New York, summer 1984.
that name sounds familiar.
He did a
Yeah.
lot of articles for like Heavy Metal magazine and music reviews and stuff like that. Loose Davis.
Thank you, Nick.
Oh, he
Yeah.
was a comics editor. He worked for Vertigo on Preacher, Doom Patrol. stuff like that. That's why that name sounds
Well,
familiar.
I hate that first fucking sentence, but I'm not a fan of that. But and look, I wrote a novel last year about so my novel People's Park is about the guy who walked around our town writing his own exegesis and writing notebooks full of, you know, traveling ropes to Mars and all that stuff. And his name was Electric Fred. And but I had a lot of respect for Fred. I liked Fred. And I wrote about him because he was a character that I liked. And what's interesting is that in a lot of ways, I think Phil was eccentric in the same kind of ways, but I think he had more control. It, there were
Yeah.
times where he had less control, and he was a very talented writer. And not every person that has these wild ideas happens to be a talented writer. And in Phil's
Yeah.
case, he was a talented writer. And what I do like about Kyle Arnold's book, and that's we mentioned it a couple of times, it's The Divine Madness of Philip K. Dick. I think Kyle Arnold argues that it was the amphetamines that, amphetamine driven psychosis, created a lot of the mental instability that Phil had.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
And I think he makes a pretty compelling case
I
in
do
that book
too.
for that.
Yeah.
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 Because
And,
certainly the
for,
symptoms.
and in that regard, you know, you, I don't know if the Phil in 1949 or 1952 would have fully recognized the writings of the older Phil, but who would recognize the writings of an older person? You grow and you change, and it is what it is. And I don't care if Phil lapsed into psychosis in 1974 or not, because I appreciate what he was pulling out of the ether and communicating, just like any other author that I think is tapped into something greater, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Absolutely.
And whether I believe or not doesn't matter. And that gets back to the whole Saucerian thing, is whether I believe or not doesn't really
Yeah.
doesn't matter. Okay. I really do want to hear from some of the folks that are here tonight. Um, because I can ask these questions, but this is more fun if we can open it up. So I'm wondering what and I know it's hard with the Q&A because I'm like you know I'm on call on some of you if I don't see a hand raised soon, because I do. And it doesn't have to be about the Saucerian. It can be about the work that Gabe's doing, because I think Gabriel's doing with the exegesis. This is a really fascinating corner that he's kind of marketed in the PKD world, and we have a chance to ask him questions, and I definitely want to hear what people think. But for me, the idea that we're gonna get more of these words, and that you're able to. Well, here's one thing, and I know this from looking at the outlines, but just seeing like the typeface of some of the stuff and seeing the handwriting gives me a different perspective, because I start to. It reminds me that he's a person. What do you think is the most valuable thing you've learned from looking at the handwritten material?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. You can get a really different sense for the way that a thought was coming to him based on how it's written. So there is a fair amount of typewritten material in there, and it becomes pretty clear that when he's typing, he's had thoughts that he's kind of had sitting in his brain for a little while, churning around, and he is now going to give you, a kind of laid out presentation of it. So a lot of those typed documents have like titles and page numbers, and they're kind of more intended as essays. Um, Whereas a lot of the handwritten stuff, you can see that he is writing as fast as the thoughts are coming to him, and maybe even, the pen is moving faster than his mind is. And so sometimes an idea will be like, the letters get bigger, and, it kind of spaces out. So he's like really rushing to get these thoughts out. He'll underline something 6 times. And so you can really see that he's, thinking by writing when he's doing that, and it's really, really kind of fascinating to see that happen.
Okay, Nick raised his hand, so he gets extra points for being first.
You're very welcome. Thanks for all the great material tonight, Gabriel.
Thanks.
So there, the exegesis is such a massive amount of material, right? How do you think about when it begins and when it ends? Do you
Ooh,
think
okay.
it begins with the very first word that he wrote chronologically, or do you think it starts to take shape at some point? I'm just curious, since there's so much of it and it's
Great
so
question.
cross
Yeah,
reference.
yeah, absolutely. So, the earliest material that's in there, and I'm gonna bracket what I'm about to say. We believed that the earliest material that was in there was letters that he started writing to Claudia Bush, and I think the earliest things are like July 1974. So several months after kind of the experiences themselves had begun in February. Um, but in that kind of batch of most recent stuff, a 1974 letter, fantastic.
That is a June 29th,
Okay,
1974.
there we go. So yeah, not quite July, but still, several months after the events. But in the kind of batch
He's
of
already forming Valis
yeah,
ideas.
yeah, in the batch of scans that I recently uploaded, there are materials that appear to be uh, I Ching questions. I've been pronouncing it wrong for like 20 years, so I can't, now that I know how to pronounce it correctly, I can never remember to. Yi Jing questions from, I believe, March 1974, because they're questions that seem to be about some of the experiences that he later describes. And they're the kind of questions that you're asking, while this is happening. And so that is kind of fascinating. But I have always thought, in addition to those letters, the notes for the Man in the High Castle sequel, the audio recorded notes, which David, you might know, I think that was around August of 74 that he was recording those.
That was, yes, and the first time he mentioned that was in the Claudia Bush letter on June 29th.
Okay,
So
great.
he
Yeah.
so he wrote about it months before he recorded the audio recordings. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So what he's saying in those audio recordings are absolutely ideas that then become core ideas in the exegesis. So ideas about kind of information being communicated through things like alphabet soup and things like that.
Well,
Those
Radio Free
are
Album started as a Man in the High Castle sequel.
yeah, yeah. So I consider that audio cassette to be part of the exegesis in a way,
Yeah.
and an early part.
Yeah.
And then yeah, then there are additional letters into 1975, and then it was a slow start though. It really wasn't until around the time that he was writing Valis that the amount of material kind of becomes substantial. But it's interesting because obviously the writing of the exegesis is a plot point in Valis, so there's a bit of a question there of, did he start writing the journal as a journal instead of as, letters and kind of these typed texts, because a lot of the earliest material is typed. Um, did he start writing the journal because Horse Lover Fat was written to be writing the journal, or, you know, was it
Well,
the other way around?
in this letter, he says another reason why I've been slow to answer is that I've been working on something I tried to get behind for 12 years, a sequel to Man in the High Castle. So he's saying he wasn't writing Claudia as much because he was working on this. But how was he working on it? Was he taking
Yeah,
notes? Was he
reading.
was he doing exegesis pages that were filling out these ideas? We don't know.
Yeah.
But
And actually one possibility that's occurred to me is that there is a exegesis's worth of material that may not have survived. Which is kind of a chilling thought in a way, but like maybe the reason that so much of the material that we have is from 8081 is because he had destroyed or otherwise not kept material from 75, 76.
well, Tim Powers said that he stopped Phil from throwing stuff in the dumpster more
Yeah,
than
but
once.
Tim Powers wasn't there every day. I
Yeah.
found a chilling page, right? So there is a single, so Phil numbers pages differently as he's going.
All right.
So
Wait, hold on one second. Keith has to run soon, but he
oh,
said
any conclusion?
he
No,
has a
there is no
question.
conclusion.
Okay.
I think if he had lived 10 more years, there would be 10 more years of exegesis. And I think that's in a way good because, if you read the Greg Rickman book, The Last Testament, at the end he was really hooked into this Benjamin Creme thing, which was I want that to have been a blind alley. I don't want that to have been the last thought. But he came to conclusions. He even wrote the end at one point, and then just kept writing the next day. So yeah, I don't think it has any conclusions beyond the aggregate. And I think the important thing about that aggregate is, for him, writing the exegesis was a process of keeping his experience going. And so if he ever stopped, that means stopping the ongoing mystical experience that had become so important to him.
Well, the rumor is that he was afraid to move because he was afraid that he would lose his connection.
Oh yeah.
I don't know about that.
Yeah, I don't know about that either. But
Yeah. I've had
um
many people tell me that, oh, I heard he didn't move because he was afraid that Valis wouldn't find. I think he would have believed that Valis would have found him anywhere. But
yeah.
yeah.
But yeah, so he would number the pages differently. There's a period where he's just numbering, page 1 to 99, because he wrote 99 pages one day, week, whatever. There's a period where every few pages, starts like A1 to A20, and then B1 to B6, and then C1 to C199. And so there's this kind of alphabetical sequence. There are a few of those, some of which are just completely scattered. Um, so there's an indication that there may have been 3 different A to Z sequences of pages, but there's only one that is anything like complete. But then there's also one section where he just started numbering continuously for a few months, where he starts at page 1, and that sequence goes all the way up to page like 1100 and something. But I found a couple things that are kind of chilling. There was one page that was a page 689 that is not part of that sequence. It's from months apart. But like, where are pages 1 through 688, and how high did that sequence go? Or was this just a random page that he wrote 689 on? And then there was a
Well, he
similar
didn't
one
have
that
any
was like,
contracts for exegesis,
yeah,
but
there
you
was
know,
another one that was page 1300 and something that was not part of this 1,000 page plus sequence. So does that mean there was an entire other like year long, more than 1,000 pages that is lost forever? Or is this just a weird random page that we will never explain?
well, if you've heard the story that Tim Powers told about writing this, that about when he hadn't written any of Valis, but he was like under contract to.
Oh, yes, yes.
He randomly put like page 88 at the top of a
Yeah.
piece of paper and then started mid sentence and wrote 2 pages and said, "Here's a sample." And there was nothing in between. I doubt he had no reason to do that.
No reason that we know, but maybe there was. Maybe he was trying to like pull a prank on KW Jeter and say like, I wrote 1,200 pages last night. Here's the proof.
That's true. Or Anthony Peaks might argue that he was a precog and he was pulling a prank on you.
Yes. Well, it worked. You got me, Phil.
Yeah. Yeah. If the argument is that he's a precog, and that he was pulling one on all of us, he's pulled a couple on us because there's been a couple that have been hard to decipher. All right, before we wrap up with Gabriel, is there any other questions, or anyone want to comments for Gabe before we close out the YouTube portion of this? That will go to YouTube. Anything else? Gabriel, how can people find your book?
Yes, so my book is called The Saucerian, UFOs, Men in Black, and the Unbelievable Life of Gray Barker. It is now out anywhere finer books are sold. Your local bookstore is always a great place to turn. It's from the MIT Press. They have great distribution, so any bookstore that sells new books should be able to get it for you. You can find me online at gabrielmckee.com. I'm also on Instagram and Blue Sky, though I don't remember my usernames offhand. They should be linked from the website though. So
Well, and as always, like support your fellow dickheads and request it at your library. Make sure that they're carrying it at your
Yes,
library.
yes. Oh, and Zebrapedia, if you want to get involved in that. Like I said, we have a lot to transcribe and a lot to proofread. I didn't even get into how the transcription is done, but we have like a kind of computer model that can read Phil's handwriting, but it needs a lot of checking. So anyway, you can help with that by signing up at fromthepage.com/Zebrapedia, or just Google Zebrapedia. It should come up. And that's like zebra as in the striped animal, pedia as in encyclopedia, Wikipedia, etc. And yeah, there is a sign up process. You need to sign a couple documents before you can get access. It's just part of the agreement with the estate, and I can explain all of that to anyone who's interested, who reaches out. But yeah, it's a fun project to work on, and there's a a lot of work to do that can be done in very small batches. So it doesn't have to be a big time sink.
And I didn't even mention that you worked on Dickpedia. Which
Oh
books did
yeah.
you do? You did Valis, right?
I did Valis. I did Our Friends from Frolics 8. And then I did you're gonna make me pronounce it. Deus Ira? Erie? Irie?
Irie. I say
Irie.
Irie.
Yeah, Irie's probably right.
Yeah. I should know this since I'm the editor of the book, but it's been a while. I've been in the minds of the short stories, so like I can't even look at anybody else's stuff right now.
Yeah.
Um, but I have I did compile a bunch of your entries, and they're great. So
Okay, cool. Thanks.
especially the Valis ones are very very detailed. So
Yeah, there was more to do on Valis than I thought there would be because, there's
yeah.
a lot of like, neologisms in the mainstream novels, and Valis is half one of those. So,
You
but yeah.
and James Chambers and his entries on Scanner Darkly, you guys were fighting for the most verbose Wikipedia entries because most of them, like mine, are very short, like a paragraph at the most. And especially James had one, I think, for the scramble suit was like, and I give him credit for that. But your Valis ones were great too. So shout out for that.
Yeah,
But
I'm looking
yeah,
forward to seeing that project come together.
yeah, it's coming together. But yeah, so and folks, please reach out to Gabriel, support his book, and as always, dickheads. We always remind you, keep it paranoid, stay paranoid, and Larry back in the editing booth. Cut.